Hey everyone, I'm Michael and welcome to Prudent Gaming. Sony's PlayStation came out of the gate swinging, boasting of its use of CD-ROM technology where each disc could hold a whopping 660 megabytes of data. Now, that doesn't sound much when compared to the 50GB Blu-ray discs the PS4 uses, but it was a major step forward back in 1994. The extra space on the CD-ROMs meant developers could be more bold with making 3D games. Not too bold apparently, as the memory on the discs was still quite limiting for the big budget adventures, with some spanning multiple discs. Developers got around this with the clever use of something called pre-rendered backgrounds, which opened up so many possibilities and really brought game worlds to life. Like everything, there are downsides to using this technique, but gamers were graced with beautiful cinematic experiences, and still are to this day, even though the technique is now outdated. Many different processes come together to make pre-rendered backgrounds, and it's how PlayStation 1 games looked so good. Pre-rendered backgrounds are brilliant. Game consoles in the 90s had very limited memory, which meant 3D environments could not be rendered in real time with a lot of detail. Something needed to be done to allow more detailed environments instead of the crude, blocky levels that some games had in the early days of 3D. Developers came up with a solution to bring stunning environments to life while saving space on the disc and the console's memory, and that was pre-rendered backgrounds. Essentially, in the simplest terms possible, these backgrounds are just 2D images the player character has been placed on top of to run around on. Artists would use separate dedicated software for 3D modelling to create the scenes and take a snapshot from the desired angle to be used in the level. Developers then imported these images into the game engine and added in collisions and walk paths to determine where the player character could walk and where the walls were. These images look beautiful at the right angle, but it's quite jarring to see a 3D environment suddenly look flat and distorted when the camera is moved from its position. Image stacking was also used to give more depth to the environments. The images would be cut in places and moved either forwards or backwards to make the scene feel 3D and more realistic and allow the player to run behind parts of the environment, like a rock or a handrail for example. How many older games have you played where the FMVs look great and wildly different to the blocky gameplay sections? Too many, I'm guessing. In an interview in Weekly Famitsu issue number 1224, talking about the original Final Fantasy VII, Yoshinori Kitase said, "We wanted to avoid feeling like there was a massive gap in the graphics when moving from movies to the playable parts." Just by looking at the intro to this game, you can clearly see this was achieved, and it was an amazing feat at the time. Pre-rendered graphics allowed for the seamless transition between cutscenes and gameplay. I know my tiny mind was blown when seeing these transitions for the first time. Pre-rendered backgrounds look amazing, but they have their drawbacks. Static images offer no interactivity from the player as they are just running around on top of a picture. Players can clearly see a difference between the background and an object they need to interact with. The stark contrast between the backgrounds and interactable objects are even more apparent with the higher fidelity screens we have today, and in the cases of these older games being remastered. The best example I could think of is Final Fantasy IX, where the new character models look fantastic, but all of the backgrounds remain the same from the original. Don't get me wrong, they still look great, but it would have been good to see some higher resolution backgrounds here. However, it would have probably been very costly and very time consuming. I have come across a mod for the PC version which uses AI upscaling of all the background images, and they look absolutely wonderful. And there is a gallery with all the images in HD, which I'll link in the description down below. Using pre-rendered backgrounds means the 2D image can only be viewed from a specific angle. Of course, that means the player can have no control over the camera and must view the scene from wherever the developers and artists want you to. The camera changes to a new position with each new image, so it's kind of like you're running through a slideshow. I briefly mentioned Final Fantasy VII, but I want to show off more of the stunning backgrounds and artwork that went into this game. This gallery on Imgur shows a handful of the backgrounds used in the game, and they look amazing at this high quality. Of course, there are hundreds more than what's in this gallery. The images used in the game have been compressed and lost some fidelity, but that wasn't really an issue on the older TVs. Every scene in this game looks gorgeous and has been carefully crafted. I do have a couple of favourites though, like Wall Market and Nibelheim. It's going to be interesting to see how Square-Enix further adapts this world in Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2. This game achieved its goal of seamlessly transitioning between pre-rendered cutscenes and gameplay purely because of the pre-rendered backgrounds.
Resident Evil.
Resident Evil is another standout title that uses pre-rendered backgrounds and in spectacular fashion. Capcom managed to create a terrifying game by using pre-rendered backgrounds to their full advantage. The realistic environments, coupled with the static camera angles to keep the player wondering what is around the corner, gives the eerie sense of isolation. Pre-rendered backgrounds were one of the major reasons why Resident Evil was so scary and also gave the game a more cinematic feel. Looking at the Resident Evil HD Remaster, we can see pre-rendered backgrounds have been used once again, and they look incredible when compared to the original. What's more is that the characters and interactable objects blend in more to the environment, meaning there isn't that disconnect and feeling of the characters just being placed onto a flat image. Myst is an interesting game to look at and was a technical marvel back in 1993. Also the year I was born, so that's two beautiful gifts to the world. Myst sees the player journeying through an interactive world solving various puzzles. It's quite remarkable this game was able to be made in the first place because it required a lot of memory for the time due to the scope of it, and the developers worried it wouldn't fit on a CD-ROM. Robin Miller, the artist for Myst, would send image after image to his brother Rand to stitch together in the game. All of the images were made and added to a queue ready to be rendered when they stopped working or went for lunch, and they had a few machines all connected to render the images faster. They used 8-bit images with 256 colours, and after compression each image was around 50 kilobytes, which helped save a lot of space on the disc. There's a great video on the development of Myst by Ars Technica, a link to which can be found in the description. All of the games we've looked at so far are quite old, which makes sense now we have supercomputers compared to the PS1 era of console. The practice of using pre-rendered backgrounds has all but died because we don't have those limitations, which begs the question, do pre-rendered backgrounds have a place in modern gaming? Absolutely. Developers may not need to use this technique to limit the space, but modern games have used this as a stylistic choice, most notably in isometric top-down RPGs like Pillars of Eternity. Pillars of Eternity made use of pre-rendered backgrounds in the same way as Baldur's Gate and the such. They pretty much go hand in hand with the genre. Pillars of Eternity started out as a Kickstarter campaign, and with decent campaigns come frequent updates about its progress. This of course was a decent campaign, and in update 79, executive producer and lead programmer Adam Brennicky gives backers a look at the graphics and rendering of the game. Here you can see backgrounds look 3D from the right perspective, but has the illusion completely shattered when the camera moves around. What's absolutely mind-blowing is how Obsidian has managed to take this old technique and stretch it to its absolute limit to add a day-night cycle using colour grading and dynamic lighting to illuminate areas to bring the scene to life. The Resident Evil HD Remaster was mentioned earlier, and Capcom used the same ideas for Resident Evil 0 HD. Characters blend nicely into the background, so there isn't a huge disconnect in some areas. You can see more has been done with the lighting to make the scenes look more realistic. Having that sense of realism pulls the player deeper into the experience and has more potential to give them the scare they seek from playing. There's just something unique about feeling like you're inside an old painting. Pre-rendered backgrounds fascinate me, and it's brilliant to see them still being used today, even if it is more of a stylistic choice than due to limitations. Developers will always find a way to work within the confines of the technology they have, and these backgrounds prove just what they can achieve. Pillars of Eternity even pushed the boundaries of using pre-rendered backgrounds. I've noticed the recent release of the Final Fantasy VII Remake has prompted a lot of people to revisit the original, and some are even playing it for the first time. Nostalgia is a big part, but it's also great to see a game with pre-rendered backgrounds just as popular today, partly because the graphics hold up so well. Speaking of course about the background, not Cloud and his weird Popeye arms. Other games around the time still look good, at the time. Looked being the key word. Games from the 90s that didn't make use of pre-rendered backgrounds looked like a blocky mess, but that's still okay because not every game could use them. Some games just do not work with pre-rendered backgrounds, and if every game was the same then it would be very boring, and 3D rendering technology in-engine probably wouldn't have progressed as far as it has today. People question whether video games are art, and that's a discussion for another day, but pre-rendered backgrounds truly are themselves works of art. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please give it a thumbs up because that really helps out, and if you haven't already, consider subscribing for more videos just like this one. Let me know your favourite games with pre-rendered backgrounds and your favourite backgrounds, and tell me if you think they should be left in the past or utilised stylistically in more modern games. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.